I never thought a quiet phase in my life could twist into something straight out of a horror movie. It started on a damp autumn evening, the kind when loneliness from a recent breakup felt as heavy as the humid air. I spent my days indoors with only the steady tapping of rain on my window and the occasional distant hum of passing cars for company. Life felt muted, as if someone had drained all the color from the world. That's when I first noticed him. Every day at the same time, I saw a man live in the old weather-beaten house across the street. He always appeared on his creaking porch, dressed in a faded cardigan and a battered hat. With slow, deliberate waves, he greeted the world in a way that was both comforting and a little off. At first, I waved back, grateful for the acknowledgement, but soon I realized there was something unnervingly steady in his gaze, a certainty that made me feel seen and watched. One blustery evening, I sat curled up by my window, clutching a cup of lukewarm tea as the room filled with the smell of damp leaves and the tail end of a storm. That night, I noticed him again. Even on days when I deliberately stayed inside, I'd catch glimpses of him through the foggy glass, waving as if he expected me to be out there. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the feeling of being silently observed clung to me like a shadow. Then one night, unable to sleep and plagued by restless thoughts, I heard the soft click of someone adjusting binoculars. I crept to my bedroom window and under the pale moonlight saw him crouch by the street. His face, lit briefly by the light, wore a detached, almost predatory expression as he slowly swept the lens across my backyard and my slightly ajar window. Frozen with disbelief and revulsion, I realized his daily wave had mutated into something invasive and sinister. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee with trembling hands, I almost missed a damp scrap of paper on my doormat. When I unfolded it, I found a crudely drawn stick figure of myself, the eyes wide and vacant. My skin crawled and I couldn't shake the notion that every benign day had been leading up to this calculated intrusion. In the weeks that followed, little details began to shift in my apartment. A cushion wasn't where I'd left it, my keys mysteriously moved from their usual perch by the door. It was as if someone had entered my home, carefully noting and even imitating my habits. At first, I chalked it up to my stressed mind, but as the changes grew unmistakable, a cold dread replaced my slight paranoia. One rainy night, as a relentless storm battered my roof, a sharp sound at my door jolted me awake. The door handle, usually cold and unyielding, now gleamed with an oily residue and faint fingerprints. Heart pounding, I peered through the peephole. Outside, in the hazy glow of a street lamp, an unfamiliar figure, silent and unnervingly purposeful, stood watching me. The mixture of damp moss and a chemical-like tang in the air made it clear that his presence was not random, it was deliberate. Then one Saturday afternoon, after a routine errand, I returned to a shocking sight on my mailbox. A series of photos of me taken from his window. There was an image of me reading on my balcony, another of me laughing on the phone, and even a shot of me in the shower. Each photo was marked by that same unnerving, steady gaze. When I touched them, I felt the sticky tape clinging to the brittle paper, the violation sinking in deeper with every texture I felt. This wasn't a random act, it was a clear message that my private moments had become his twisted entertainment. Determined to reclaim my space, I started documenting every anomaly. I discreetly set up a camera by the window, scribbling down notes each day with a mix of fear and defiance. I recorded the exact times he appeared, how the fog draped his porch in the early dawn, and even the muddied footprints near my door. It was like living inside a nightmare that I could neither wake from nor escape. One rainy Tuesday, while nervously smoothing down my blouse near my car, I noticed a trail of wet, dark soil along the side mirror. Following it back to my front porch, I saw distinct muddy footprints, not my own, that ended right at the edge of my garden. The rich, loamy scent of the soil mingled with my rising panic. Those footprints led directly to my door, a silent invitation, or perhaps a warning that my space was no longer mine. That night, I left my window ajar, half hoping to see him up close and finally understand his intentions. As the wind howled and shadows danced in the dim corridors of my building, a soft tapping echoed inside my apartment. My heart raced as I crept toward the sound until I reached the communal laundry room. There, a door that was always locked creaked open, and I caught a fleeting glimpse of a figure disappearing into darkness. Near the door frame, a small, dark stain, or was it a fingerprint, had haunted my vision, and then came the most unnerving moment. I awoke to the sound of shuffling outside my bedroom window. Drawn by dread and a desperate need for answers, I peeked through the slats of my blinds. There he was again, but not waving, not peering with binoculars. Now he was crouched near my window, just inches away, his face a blur of shadow and determination. My throat tightened as I watched him carefully set down the binoculars on a small table beside my window. This wasn't a benign greeting, it was an active, chilling assertion of control. With a surge of resolve fueled by fear, I grabbed a small recorder I had kept for moments like this. I whispered into it, "I'm here and I'm done living in fear." That quiet defiance was the only thing anchoring me to a reality that suddenly felt untrustworthy. I began gathering every piece of evidence, the photos, the notes, the scraps of his intrusion, in an effort to piece together a narrative that might finally free me from this terror. The next evening, with nerves taut as guitar strings, I cautiously pushed my front door open a crack and peered out into the rain-soaked street. There he was on his usual creaking porch, the street lamp casting eerie shadows over his face. But now his eyes were not simply waving at me, they were scanning, measuring, as if calculating every detail of my vulnerability. I retreated inside, the taste of fear bitter on my tongue. That night, the storm outside seemed to echo every tremor of anxiety inside me. I double-checked my locks and listened to the relentless patter of rain until, amid the quiet, I heard the unmistakable rustle of paper underfoot by my door. Peering through the peephole again, I saw him, so close that I could almost feel his presence as he inspected the threshold of my living room with a careful precision that spoke of intimacy with every detail of my life. In a moment of desperate bravery, I opened my door and called out, "Who are you? What do you want from me?" My voice wavered but carried the weight of my determination. He didn't answer. Instead, he smiled, a slow, unnerving smirk that promised more intrusion, more violations. In that chilling silence, I realized this wasn't mere loneliness gone awry. It was a meticulously planned invasion of my privacy. I started trailing him at a distance whenever he left his porch, trudging through rain-soaked sidewalks and dim alleys. Each time he vanished behind crumbling walls or darted into shadowed corners, the sound of his boot splashing in puddles echoed like a heartbeat of impending doom. The muddy footprints, the faint smells of moss and chemicals were his calling cards, a constant reminder that he was always near. The final piece of this horrifying puzzle came one late night. Sitting with a worn mug in my hands and my mind replaying every unsettling moment, I heard the rustle of paper inside my apartment. I jumped up, adrenaline clearing the fog of fear, and followed the sound toward the living room. In the weak glow of a street lamp seeping through my window, I found it. A single photograph of me taped to the inside of my mailbox. It was a full-color shot taken from his window, capturing me in a moment of vulnerability that made my skin crawl. The texture of the tape and the brittle paper confirmed it. It was personal, calculated, and deeply violating. Every bead of sweat felt like a final drop of dread as I cradled the photo in my shaking hands. I set up an old camcorder facing the street, determined to capture any sign of his next move. The following morning, I reviewed the footage with trembling fingers. There he was again, on his creaking porch as always, but then, in a rare, unguarded moment, he slipped hurriedly past my window, a shadow moving with the urgency of a predator in mid-hunt. I spent the next few days reaching out to local security services, sharing evidence and recounting every detail of my ordeal. I learned that he had a history of escalating obsessions, small, invasive acts that eventually turned into full-blown harassment. Armed with this knowledge and trembling resolve, I confronted him one rainy twilight. I marched across the slick, dim street and knocked on his door. Silence greeted me, but as I turned to go back, I caught sight of his face in a dark window. There he was, unmoving and watching with an intensity that made every nerve in my body stand on end. After that confrontation, the disturbances stopped as suddenly as they had begun, a brief calm before a storm that left scars. My home slowly regained its sense of safety, yet every creak of the floor and every shifting shadow under a street lamp still carried the echo of his unnerving smile. Sometimes I wonder if he might reappear, if this was merely a pause in a darker ritual. But in the quietest moments, that haunting gaze and the memory of those photos always resurface. And sometimes in the dead silence of night, I realize with a chill that some doors never really stay shut.